It happened fast, the kind of fast that makes generals rub their temples and air defense officers stare at radar scopes that have gone worryingly quiet. In a handful of nights, Ukraine punched ragged holes through Russia's supposed shield. A MiG-31 sat loaded for war and ended up a blackened silhouette. A Pantsir system that should have been the last line of defense became nothing but toast on tracks. S-400 eyes, those prized radars, blinked out. And far from the front, deep in what Moscow calls the safe rear, launchers erupted and a submarine nursed wounds that no press release could wish away. Rough stretch? That's the polite version. This was the week the fortress sprang leaks, and the propaganda machine, usually so sure-footed, tripped over its own story. Crimea is where the signal flare went up. Ukraine's SBU, its security service, put out photos of the aftermath at Belbek Air Base, a place Russia treats like a crown jewel on the peninsula. Their claim was specific and devastating. Long-range drones from the Alpha Special Operations Center found and destroyed a fully armed MiG-31 on the runway, a Pantsir S-2, 2 Nebo radars, and the 92 N6 fire control radar that ties an S-400 battery's missiles to their prey. You didn't need to be an engineer to read the implications. Lose the radars, and the missiles are deaf. Knock out the 92 N6, and your vaunted S-400 becomes a set of expensive tubes staring into the dark. There was no triumphant video this time, only stills. But even Russian channels largely echoed the Ukrainian list while they fumbled for explanations. The message felt less like a boast and more like a receipt. If the strike in Crimea was the headline, Belgorod was the exclamation point. There, roughly 50 kilometers from the front, Ukrainian kamikaze drones found at least one S-400 launcher and turned it into a pyre, with Russian military correspondents begrudgingly noting a direct hit that cooked the missile pack where it stood. Footage released by Ukraine, commentary confirmed by pro-war Russian sources, yes, you read that correctly, showed the launcher burning and another damaged. Now consider the geography. Belgorod is not some trench-riddled grey zone. It is Russia proper, when your strategic air defense units are taking losses on your side of the border, not from stealth jets or ballistic missiles, but from drones you told the world you could swat with ease. Your safe map turns into a chessboard with too many open files. Belbek's MiG-31 deserved its own obituary. Russia uses that airframe as a high-speed interceptor and, critically, as a carrier for the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. A MiG-31 with full arsenal, as Kiev put it, parked in the open and ready to go, suggests either a burst of confidence or a lapse in discipline. The result was neither. What remains of a jet torched on the runway could be tidied up with cranes, but the hole it leaves in sortie generation and the fright it puts into crews, who now know they can be reached, that lingers. The Pantsir that should have guarded the perimeter did not. The Nebo and 92 N6 radars that should have cued fires never got the chance. The dance between sensor and shooter is the core of modern air defense. Ukraine walked into that dance hall, switched off the lights, and left Russia stepping on its own toes. Part of the shock here is psychological. For months, Russian air defense around Crimea has been marketed as layered, resilient, a porcupine bristling with spikes. The porcupine bleeds like anything else when you cut the nerve endings. Radars are precision instruments with long manufacturing tails layered with specialized components Russia cannot simply find at the corner store. You can stack launchers in a field and call it a brigade, but without the right eyes and brains, all you've built is an expensive museum of tubes. That's why the SBU's accounting targeted radars first and foremost. It's also why each destroyed array hurts twice, once for the immediate loss, and again for the months it takes to replace it with something truly calibrated and combat ready. If you're a Ukrainian planner, you don't need to kill the entire S-400 ecosystem to change the fight. You only have to amputate what makes it think. The Belgorod strike reveals a different truth. Russia's attempt to stretch a finite blanket of air defense across too many critical nodes is starting to leave bare ankles. Strategic sites in Crimea, bases in the occupied south, refineries and depots along the border, cities suddenly reclassified as front adjacent. Each screams for batteries and crews. The invisible thread that knits this all together is radar coverage. Cut enough threads and you don't have a sweater, you have a pile of yarn. Defenders are now forced into an ugly trade-off. Do you protect the refinery that feeds the front, the airbase that launches the patrols, or the city whose panic will be broadcast in the morning? Ukraine keeps adding insult to injury by forcing those choices with cheap, long-range drones that can be bought faster than a new radar can be built. Imagine trying to plug a leaky dam with golden corks. Eventually, you just run out of corks. All of this would be a tidy case study in modern strikes if it weren't for the subplot that unfolded along the Oskil River. In Kupansk, yes, the same town that has rollercoastered between headlines, Moscow's narrative machine declared victory, announced that Russian forces had liberated the city, pocketed 19 Ukrainian battalions, and mopped up. If your eyebrows shot up, you weren't alone. Ukrainian footage from within the town kept appearing, and the usual crowd of map sleuths geolocated a Russian "look at us strolling through Kupansk" video not in the city at all, but in a village 20 kilometers away, deep in Russian-held territory. Suddenly, prominent Russian mill bloggers weren't cheering. They were fuming, warning that taking cities on credit is paid back in blood when the bill comes due. The dissonance grew so loud that even as the general staff stuck to the party line, the analysts on the same side begged for realism and reinforcements. A war can survive bad news. It struggles with unbelievable news. There's a larger lesson here about information operations colliding with the physics of open source intelligence. In 2022, you could claim a village and you might buy a day before someone corrected you. In 2025, teenagers with phones and veterans with satellite subscriptions will undercut you in minutes. When official statements 2 steps removed from reality collide with drone footage uploaded from a street corner, legitimacy takes the hit. And legitimacy is a form of ammunition, the kind that keeps reserves motivated, partners confident, and mothers convinced their sons are being led by adults. When the messaging runs aground on obvious facts, you end up with an army that doesn't just face the enemy's drones, it fights its own doubts. Zoom back to Crimea and the Black Sea. Days before Belbek, another blow landed below the waterline. A Russian submarine in Sevastopol had already been mauled in an earlier strike. This latest wave reminded everyone that the sanctuary once built under a presumed air defense umbrella never quite became what the brochures promised. The Black Sea Fleet has spent 2 years learning humility, and every damage report from Sevastopol compounds a trend. Ukraine doesn't need dominance to exert pressure. It needs enough reach to impose costs at times and places of its choosing. Dockyards that should be humming with maintenance are instead juggling repairs. Air defences that should be resting are perpetually on edge. Sailors who signed up to sail are staring at patchwork. In an attritional contest, the side that forces the other to spend its logistics on recovery instead of initiative wins inches that add up to miles. Tactically, these strikes map to a doctrine of sensor starvation. Picture an integrated air defense as a chain. Surveillance radar detects, engagement radar tracks, command node assigns, launcher fires, interceptor kills. Break the chain at detection and tracking, and the later links rust unused. Belbek lost the Nebo arrays, excellent at spotting high-flying or stealthy threats, and the 92 N6 engagement radar, the very brain that matches missile to target. In Belgorod, a launcher itself died, underscoring another angle. Explode the missile pack, and you don't just reduce the inventory, you force commanders to rethink where they stage their most sensitive systems. The fieldcraft that worked near Bryansk last month might get a unit killed south of Kursk tomorrow. Survivability becomes a game of musical chairs, and the music is controlled by the side with more drones than you have watchstanders. Operationally, Ukraine is exploiting 2 Russian pain points. replacement timelines, and manpower fatigue. Radars are not mere hardware. They are calibration, software, and crew proficiency embodied. You can ship a new set, but training the team to milk every decibel of signal out of a complex array takes months. Meanwhile, crews cycle through a steady diet of alerts. Launch, relocate, camouflage, repeat. Bleeding experience as veterans age out or burn out. A single drone that costs less than the fuel load of one MiG-31 can force a battery to limber up and roll, leaving a hole in coverage that someone else must fill. Multiply that across a front that stretches from the Azov coast to the Bryansk forests, and you understand why Ukrainian planners keep tasting blood and coming back for another bite. Strategically, the symmetry is brutal. Russia wanted to keep the war over there, a distant, televised thing. Ukraine decided there is no over there. Belgorod is not an accident. It is a proof of concept that the border is a seam, not a wall. Each strike shifts the mental map inside Russia, from distant pride to anxious proximity. This matters because wars are fought by societies, not just armies. Do you keep your S-400 battery near a major city to reassure the public? Or do you move it to cover an airbase that keeps getting visited after midnight? What happens to refinery throughput when the air raid sirens become a weekly soundtrack? A strategic defense stretched to cover everything covers nothing well, and that is the condition Ukraine is trying to engineer, a Russia busy defending symbols at the expense of effects. Of course, none of this means a knockout is around the corner. Russia is still big, still brutal, still capable of absorbing punishment and returning it with interest. The Belbek photo set isn't a surrender document. The burning launcher in Belgorod isn't a collapse. But strategy is the art of changing the odds, not rolling a single six. Every radar removed from the fight changes the daily calculus for Ukrainian pilots and drone operators. Every MiG-31 that doesn't take off is one less Kinzhal patrol. Every Pantsir that fails to swivel is a window for a one-way UAV. In a war defined by gradualism and scarcity, these are not headlines so much as compounding interest. There's also the quiet economy of fear. Crews at far rear airfields now park differently. Commanders write new SOPs about dispersal and camouflage that sound suspiciously like the memos their grandparents wrote. Logistics officers find themselves asking for concrete revetments they never thought they'd need, for dummy decoys that cost a little but save a lot, for the authority to move fuel bladders out of neat rows and into awkward safety. Fatigue creeps in. The sound of a quadcopter at 2 a.m. used to be someone's lawn. Now it's an adrenaline spike. You can't quantify that on a map, but it lives in the pauses between orders. The information fracas around Kupansk adds another erosion channel. When High Command insists that 19 battalions were trapped and destroyed, and the next day your favourite nationalist blogger says, actually, we have a problem, the rank and file learn a bitter lesson about which voices to trust. The video misgeolocated and touted as proof of control became an own goal, a reminder that reality has a way of leaking even through the seams of controlled media. If the truth is going to come out anyway, through Ukrainian helmet cams, through locals' telegrams, through your own men's private chats, the cost of overpromising grows. War is hard enough without telling your soldiers the sky is green. For Ukraine, this week validates an investment in the ungentle art of range. The Alpha SSO's long-reach drones did not arrive by magic. They are the sum of thousands of trial-and-error flights, of cottage industry manufacturers and donor drives, of engineers who learned to tune an airframe until it slips past a radar cone, like a cat through a fence. Range doesn't only mean distance, it means options. With a quiverful of one-way systems that can loiter, climb, spoof, and dive, you can write the enemy's agenda for the night. You don't need to break him, you need to make him choose poorly, again and again, until the consequences get big. Which brings us to the balance sheet Russia must compile. How many Nebo arrays do you have left that can do the specific look-angle job in Crimea's complicated terrain? How many 92 N6s are in the pipeline? and how many can be spared from other regions that don't consider themselves expendable? Can you keep your MiG-31 fleet generated without turning parking aprons into bullseyes? Does moving S-400s deeper into the interior protect them, or simply shorten their useful reach over the front? There are no happy answers in that list. Each fix creates a seam somewhere else. Each seam is a note on a Ukrainian targeteer's whiteboard. It would be neat and tidy to say this week changed the war. Better to say it clarified it. The Black Sea Fleet will not swagger. Crimea will not be a safe base. It will be a contested platform. Air defence will not be an iron dome. It will be a quilt with stitched over patches and worry beads. The front line is not a line. It is a gradient of risk that now washes across border cities and far rear depots alike. Somewhere, an officer is updating a PowerPoint slide to show a yellow ring around Belgorod, labelled New Normal. Somewhere else, a pilot stares at satellite photos of Belbek and decides to sleep in his flight suit tonight. Before we close, a quick reality check. Ukraine's claims about Belbek were unusually detailed, but came with still photos, not the familiar drone kill videos. Russian channels didn't so much deny as deflect, and in Belgorod, the begrudging confirmations were as telling as the flames. The fog is real, but the pattern is clearer than any single frame. A MiG-31 on a runway it did not leave, a Pantsir that didn't shoot, radars that didn't warn, an S-400 launcher that died on home soil. These are not vibes. They are events that force adaptations. The side that adapts faster keeps the initiative. The side that insists the initiative never changed risks discovering reality the hard way. So where does this go? If Ukraine can keep starving Russian sensors, keep forcing batteries to move and commanders to hedge, the penalties will stack. Russia will find some replacements, shift some assets, and hit back. The war's rhythm demands it. But every week like this one is a rehearsal for a future in which the rear is a myth and expensive systems either hide or die. That favours the side that buys cheap and thinks asymmetric. It favours the side that can turn a grainy satellite plot into a strike plan by nightfall. It favours the side that understands the new arithmetic. A $50,000 drone that kills a radar worth millions. A doctored video that costs a narrative worth billions. In a conflict famous for grinding inches, these weren't inches. They were switches. Things turned off that will take time to turn back on. Maybe the MiG-31 crews at Belbek will be back on the flight line soon, taxiing with that distinctive howl. Maybe a new 92 N6 will swivel up to stare at the sky like nothing happened. But the crews will look over their shoulders more often. The command posts will colour their maps differently. And the audience in Russia, told one story about Kupansk while seeing another unfold, will listen with a little less faith the next time a triumphant claim blares through the evening news. War rarely offers clean endings. It does, sometimes, offer crisp moments of redefinition. This was one. A fortress learned that its windows are made of glass. A rear area learned it is a front. A story learned it needs to match the pictures. And far to the west, a small country with a long memory learned, again, that reach is a weapon all its own. The question now isn't whether Russia can absorb the blows. It's whether it can adapt faster than Ukraine can iterate. Whether it can grow radars faster than Ukraine can grow wings. Whether it can tell a story that its own soldiers are willing to believe. Because in wars like this, belief is the quiet fuel that keeps machines and men moving. If your air defense is a porcupine, stop letting the other guy walk up and give it a haircut. Better dispersion, better deception, better doctrine, or better luck. For Ukraine, the playbook is simpler. Keep writing nights like these into the calendar, and keep reminding your opponent that there is no such thing as a safe runway within reach. The fortress isn't falling, it's learning, painfully, that it has to live differently now. And that, in a long war, is how momentum begins. Not with a single spectacular collapse, but with a series of nights that make tomorrow harder than yesterday. If Crimea's radars are the nerves and Belgorod's launchers the fists, then this week showed the body can be numbed and the hands forced open. That's not victory, it's leverage. And leverage, used well, moves heavy things. So the next time you hear air defense umbrella, remember Belbek's runway, remember the glow south of the border, and remember how quickly a narrative can combust when a camera pans just a little too wide. The war goes on, the map doesn't change much, but the comfort does. And for a power built on the promise of safety at home, that may be the most dangerous loss of all.